Okie doke. Welcome to the latest and greatest ISO form. This is form number 9 on the 9001 changes. We started these forms in August of 2013 and have gradually kind of picked up the frequency this year as we have more and more changes to talk about. My name is Jim Thompson. I am with Concentric Management Systems down in Charleston, South Carolina. Our office is right downtown, and from time to time you might hear a siren or a fire truck because we're right in the middle of town. So I apologize in advance for that, but I'll try to keep the external distractions to a minimum. If you have questions as we go, feel free to shout out. You can chime right in. You can use the chat feature, which is the second bubble on the left. If you want to chat to the group or you want to chat to directly to me, you can change that. I'm going to go ahead and put the audio on mute just to keep the background noise down, and then I'll unmute it as we go if you have any questions. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this session will be recorded. Visit us online after the training or after the webinar if you'd like to watch it in the future. Pass it along to others if you want. The more, the merrier in terms of spreading the news about the video, because it's free and the shelf life is about a month. So the more it's shared, the better. And it's always relevant information, up to date. Every month, I'll go through and pull articles and read different blogs and posts and go to seminars or webinars myself and try to pull as much as I can from latest information about the standard and the evolution of the drafts and that sort of thing. So I'm pleased to share it with you. If you'd like, and I'll kind of touch base on this at the tail end, if you'd like to join future webinars, they don't cost anything. It's easy to register. We'll have probably one a month continuing throughout the rest of the year. It's going to become increasingly important around the September to through December time as the draft is finally released as an international standard, and that's expected in September, but I'll go through those timelines and that sort of thing. So okay, so a bit about the projected changes and where these changes have come from and the kind of the timeline up to this point. So in June 2012, the standard started to be reviewed for updates or obsolescence or being archived. It was obviously deemed worthwhile to keep 9001 and the family of documents in 9001 available and published and released. So from June 2012 through now, you're seeing just an evolution of different drafts that TC 176 has kind of organized and gone through based on feedback from the various member bodies that are participating from different countries. So a quick overview of this 9000 family of documents. So the current version, you have the 8-clause structure. The initial release was back in '87. We're right now looking at Rev 4 as the standard that is released today. It's the 2008 version. As some of you can recall, there was a massive restructuring and reorganization from the 1994 version to the 2000 to go from the 20 element structure down to the 8 clauses. And then in 2008, I think the global community just kind of said, whoa, we're still dealing with aches and pains associated with changes. from the 2000 release. So there were very, very few changes in 2008. So 2015, later this year, we're expecting, I would say this is kind of where you squeeze the water hose together for 15 years, and then all of a sudden you've got a lot of changes that have been pinned up. That's what we're going to see in in September and beyond with the release of the standard. The range of the effect of the standard is pretty incredible, really. You've got 1.2 million plus organizations that are registered globally. So these are the companies that go out and seek a third-party certification type audit, and they become registered in this book of companies that comply with the minimum requirements. 1.2 million, that's a lot. That is a lot of registrations, entered into this book or database globally. And then you have countless other organizations that use 9000 as the baseline for their quality management system, even though they don't go through the formal certification process through a third party. This is, not only a big number with the 1.2 million, but you also have 140 some countries that are participating and have organizations within their country that have a certification that's registered. So actually, let me take a second now and see if there are any questions before I go any further. Any questions thus far?
No.
Okay. Fair enough. I will press on. So just to compare a couple of other standards that are heavily involved, kind of side by side with 9000, and also very globally recognized and globally adopted. You've got the 14000 Environmental Management System standard, and then you also have on the next slide here the OHSAS or OHSAS 18001 family. So let's look at the environmental standard for a second. So the layout is very different as compared to the current version of 9000. You have these 17 elements. Again, back on the quality management system side, you have eight elements. The 14 and the 18 are very much aligned. They're easily integrated. They're typically bundled together. A lot of organizations will have what's called an HSE leader, a health, safety, and environmental leader that kind of manages both of those standards, both of those aspects of the business. And it's because of that alignment, it makes it easy for that individual that's kind of the facilitator of those two standards. It's easy for them to manage. So there are, again, a lot of organizations registered to 14001 globally. You've got 200,000 plus. Still, a million behind 9001, but that's a substantial amount, 200,000 plus companies registered, 138 countries. The first revision or first release was 1996. The current version of 14001 is the 2004 revision, and then we're expected shortly after the release of 9001 to also have the release of 14001. That'd be Rev 3. So a very similar slide to the environmental slide is this OHSAS or Occupational Health and Safety standard. So the requirements are in parallel with 14001. Here you've got 55,000 registrations worldwide, 116 countries. The standard actually isn't an international standard. It's a British standard. So if you look here, you've got the official number of this document would be BS, which is British Standard, OHSAS 18001. That went through a change in 2007, and what you'll see in 2015, perhaps early 2016, is this new international standard that will be called ISO 45001. So instead of using a British standard, the occupational health and safety standard will, I guess, spread its wings a bit and grow up to be a official ISO standard. So that number is 45,001. And the good news about all of these changes and all of these standards that are coming down the pipeline and we'll see released later this year is that there's a lot of alignment, and I'll get to that in just a couple of slides. So let me open the door again for some questions before we move on to the next couple slides. Okay. I will press. So just a quick overview of what happens with these standards, and there are 16,000 plus standards globally that the International Organization for Standardization manages. So back in June 2012, you had some draft design specs being reviewed. You know, what is it that we want to do with this standard? Are the terms that are being used still relevant? And you'll see in that top right box, you could revise, use as is, or deem the standard obsolete. So we've come to this point where we're at this final draft international standard being voted on, and that voting will be, it's expected sometime in June or July for final publication. So that's kind of where we are here. But every 5 years, you get this cycle, 5-6 years of all of these standards. So something that's quite interesting here, again, if you look at the global presence, is you've got these 16,500 standards, and they go through this cycle. We talked about 1.2 million. There's lots of others that subscribe. But when you look at the number of certificates that have been issued out, this survey is a few years old, but this is the most relevant information I could find that's published out there now. You've got China in the lead, which is no real surprise. You've got the UK here, the United States here with 28,000 organizations that have a certificate to 9,001. You know, China is just killing it here. Italy is kind of strange. I wouldn't expect Italy to have as many certificates, but one that's also very interesting is Germany. Germany has the most per capita in terms of a lower number of organizations and people in the country, and they have the most per capita of any country currently with organizations that are registered. So there you go. There's some probably fairly useless trivia for your trivia night down at Applebee's or whatever, but there it is. I think it's very interesting to me to kind of see where these certificates are being held and which companies we're seeing a demand for registration. So within this large organization called the International Organization for Standardization, you have this group called TC-176. TC-176, TC stands for Technical Committee. 176 is the number allocated to this group. They're responsible for the review, updates, execution of the 9,000 family. Now, when you hear family, that's because there's more than just this 9001 standard that you get registered to. You also have a 9000, which is terms and definitions, and then this guidance document for 9004. And then you have this new standard called the 10,000 series, and the idea is the 10,000 series becomes more of an umbrella for documentation for quality management systems. So I'll talk a bit more about that, and yes, this is an awful umbrella, but the point is that this is a new document as well. Back in 2013, the thought was, let's solicit feedback from the member bodies, from those countries that are participating in the development of this standard. And there were 12,000 plus responses that were received in terms of what the different organizations in the different countries thought the direction of the new standard or the updates should be. So in 122 countries represented, you had a lot of voice of the customer. You had a lot of feedback. So what TC 176 was responsible for doing is taking kind of the aggregate of all of that feedback and boiling it down and using that as an input into the modifications to the standard. That's a pretty big job. So here is the stages of development. You start with a new work order, working draft, committee draft. When we started conducting these classes or these forums, the committee draft had been released, and now we're in this stage of the draft international standard being approved back in November by almost 90% of those voting members. And we're now looking at the final draft international standard being released. That was released in February, and the final draft international standard ballot or voting is expected in July of 2015. So with respect to the question that I get a lot of times, which is how much more changes are expected, my best guess, and again, this is just the best guess, I'm not on the technical committee, and you don't know what actually is going to shake out until the voting commences, and whatever's left on the table is the standard. But my guess is there won't be a ton of last-minute changes, just because if you look on this last slide, when you see a very, very high approval rating of almost 90%, I think you kind of hesitate to make too many changes in these final stages. So my guess is that, it is smart to start thinking ahead now. What resources will you need? What changes in the standard will impact the way that I manage my QMS? There certainly will be some changes that come out in the final release, and that is expected in September. There's a link here where I got this illustration. I'll share kind of our library of links so that if you wanted to read some additional information from the source of some of these slides, I'll be glad to show you how to do that easily. So any questions before I move ahead?
Good here.
Okay. So moving on. So you also have certain sectors that are very interested in the development of 9001 because there's so many other standards out there that are built on top of 9001 as the baseline. So, for example, we do a lot of work in the automotive and the aerospace manufacturing realm. You have to wait and see what the final release of 9001 is going to be before you can then modify and put your automotive or aerospace specific requirements on top of that. So the aerospace community was pretty quick to come out of the gates and say, we're going to use the 2015 standard as our baseline. We're going to continue to kind of build on top of 9001. The automotive sector has been kind of difficult in a late adopter in agreeing on using 9001 as the baseline. There was actually some, I don't know what was going on. I'm not behind those closed doors, but some talks about succeeding from 9001 and creating a specifically unique standard for automotive internationally, and I'm happy to see that that's no longer the case, that the automotive sector is going in the same direction as 9001. But you also have medical and TL 9000 and some others that are sector specific that build on top of 9001. So here is, I put the screenshot here based on several questions from previous forums, and that is TS 16949 going to follow and piggyback off of 9001? And these are the three latest communications that come from the International Automotive Task Force, which is kind of like the global AIAG, international community responsible for TS 16949. So the thought here is that they are moving forward. They've completed an early phase of developing and building TS 16949 on top of 9001. And you can get into more details if you go to itfglobaloversight.org. That's where you can find out more about this. If you go to, you can even just Google ITF and go to, where is it? You've got this right here, which is the working group news. And then there are also some ITF certification body communiques. So it's a good resource. You can keep checking back there. I check there often. A couple of my other guys that are doing TS auditing check back there often, and we kind of aggregate, pull all that information together and post blogs and things on our website. So feel free to check it out on our website as well. So one of the big changes is this document called Annex LS. And really the shortcut to what Annex LS is it's a standard for standards. So it's the rules governing management system standard development, so that as the different management system standards evolve and are changed and released, there's a common layout, which is going to be, in my opinion, great specifically for those organizations where you've got one or more individuals trying to manage multiple management system certifications. The whole premise of the name of our company, which was founded in 2003, is this concept of concentricity, or having a common center, which is just the way you do business. So Annex LS provides that framework for organizations to easily align multiple different standards together, so that you don't have, for example, a document control procedure for your EMS system and then another document control for your quality management system. You've got perfect alignment, and that's what Annex LS brings to the table. So if you were going to, again, look at, let's say, a corrective action system, or how you handle nonconformities or something like that, you could expect this lane to be the lane that perhaps you would have a documented procedure or some sort of training or some other policies. And if you created one document for how you approached improvement or corrective action, you could bundle the requirements of that procedure to satisfy the health and safety, the environmental, and the quality management system. So I think this is going to be great, especially for those organizations that are trying to have an integrated approach to their management system. So I think that's good, and Annex LS will pertain to any future management systems that don't have this layout and this structure. Now, with that said, you don't have clauses 1 through 8 anymore. You have really the meat and potatoes here with clause 4 through 10. So some companies will probably have a little bit of growing pain in that their documentation and their quality management system structure is laid out in accordance with the 2000 or the 2008 version. So you have 7 major clauses that have these requirements baked into them. Now, one question I get is, well, do we have to restructure our documentation? You know, what's that going to do in terms of the numbers that we call documents? There's no requirement anywhere for you to go through and reorganize your numbering. I know some organizations are going to choose to do that, and that's fine. That's their call, but there's certainly not a requirement. As the standard practitioners, especially in the 2000, the 2000 version, as they've suggested for many, many years, you might want to think about creating your documentation around a process approach that's unique to your organization versus the standards and the standard numbering scheme, because here again, just like in 2000, you've got a pretty substantial change. The numbering scheme is not what it once was. So just a heads up there. And with that, I'm going to pause again for just a second to see if anyone else has any questions before we move forward.
So it looks like right now that the automotive certified companies will be required to make changes related to the new 2015 ISO 9000 standard, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, there's an asterisk by that. Yes, of course, there's going to have to be a migration to the new standard. In some organizations, you'll see in their lobbies, or if you ask for proof of certification, you'll see that they have a 9001 certificate, and then they have a TS 16949 certificate. So I like the fact that the automotive sector is on board. Now, the question is going to be, how quickly will TS 16949 or whatever the number actually ends up being? It may be ISO 16949. But the idea is that the stuff that's inside the box in the automotive standard has to be defined first, and then the automotive folks will add their supplements outside of the box like you currently see with TS 16949. Now, the good news with automotive companies is that a lot of you have been forced through, FMEA, through, corrective action impact, and some other things that won't be as big of a growing pain to you because you've already been forced to do that sort of risk-based thinking, and some of the significant changes that the non-automotive customers will maybe have some growing pains with. So, any other questions?
That's it.
Okay. So one of the other questions that comes up, very pertinent to the question that was just asked, is what's the expectation for the transition? My recommendation, and this is based on my experiences working as a lead auditor with a registrar, also being a quality management representative in several organizations, and then 20 years in quality, work directly with your current registrar and your customers, because your customers can come along and say, we don't care about what ISO says as far as, TC 176 saying you've got 3 years or 2 years to transition. We want you to transition in a year. Your customers can always come to you and ask you for a transition plan that's more aggressive than what the standard TC 176 committee comes up with. But right now, the expectation is 3 years. I've heard 2 to 3 years. I've read 2 to 3 years and 18 months, and the official communications that's coming out from Niall Croft, who's the CEO of ISO, is that you've got probably a good chance of a 3-year transition plan. So if you have an update and release in September 2018 or 2015, then you have to 2018 to transition over. So my recommendation is to start now. Avoid the bottlenecks associated with everybody trying to get their certification transferred over in the fourth quarter of 2018. It's going to happen. Some of your suppliers are going to do it. That in some organizations that are on the line, management may not be really into a proactive approach to transitioning, but start now with that plan to transition, because what's going to happen is you're going to have the same thing happen in 2018 as we saw in 2003, and that is so many organizations waited until that last minute. There just wasn't the bandwidth in the registrar community. There wasn't enough auditors to go around, so there were some companies that actually had a lapse in their certification, and you just don't want to go to your customer and say, hey, Toyota, we're going to be without a valid registration for the next 6 months until we could get our audit scheduled. You don't want to do that. So start now. Start talking to your registrar now. Ask them what they expect their projected timeline to be in terms of transitioning over. And just avoid surprises now by asking those questions now and being prepared. So let's get into some of the highlights of the current draft in the final draft international standard phase, and I'll pause a couple times here for questions as we go along. So most significantly is the high-level structure. Again, we talked about the Annex LS kind of imposing this new layout and this new structure on this standard, also the QMS or the EMS and the OHS standard as well. You also have these 3 annex that have been added to the end, and again, this is based on the draft only. But Annex A shows clarification. Annex B would be QMS principles, and Annex C is the QMS family of standards that also addresses how ISO 10000 kind of fits into the picture. So one of the most, early and significant changes is this idea of context of the organization, and this makes sense. You can align this directly to 4.1. I think it's A through F or A through G in the current version of the standard. The idea here is define who you are. What are all the parts or the processes of your management system? When you say to the marketplace, we are registered to 9001, what does that mean? What processes are you managing that are internal processes versus processes that you're required to manage that are external? What are the needs and expectations of interested parties? So there's this interested parties phrase in terms that are used that really gets you to think much more holistic in terms of your impact as an organization to individuals and other companies, not just suppliers, not just customers, but end users, the marketplace, your neighbors, your employees, that sort of thing. So who is an interested party? So these are some of the questions that need to be answered first. And I like this being a little bit more granular, so it's easy to tell where your responsibilities and where your QMS starts and ends. Okay. Within Clause 4, you'll also see 4.3. This is where you more thoroughly define your scope and the applicability of your management system. So unlike today where you've got Clause 7 and 7.3 specific for product design or design and development where you can exclude that clause, there is no reference to exclusions, at least thus far in the draft. If a requirement can't be applied, you still have to ensure conformity. So if you're having parts checked or you're having some calibration services done externally, or you have some contingency workers on staff, just because they don't work for your organization does not absolve you from the responsibility of ensuring that the customer expectations are being met. So for those that have been subscribers to TS 16949, that shouldn't be a problem, and this just further increases that control for general QMS organizations. Leadership. So you won't see top management. You'll see this term leadership. The QMS policy and objectives need to be aligned. There needs to be commitment from leadership. It's compatible. The QMS layout and some standard terms and definitions are much more compatible with business direction and kind of business executive leadership speak rather than so much quality or ISO speak. The management rep can also be more than one person, which I know a lot of management reps are excited about. QMS planning. So the idea here, and there's a SWOT analysis tool that we have on the right side here. There is nothing that says you have to use a SWOT analysis tool, but that's something that we use a lot. It's very simple. But the idea is that as you're planning your overall execution for your quality management system, you evaluate opportunities. What are some opportunities that we're missing out on? And then there's this new terminology called risk-based thinking. Risk-based thinking is probably one of the top 1, 2, 3 changes that organizations are going to have to kind of migrate through. And the idea is, instead of putting so much emphasis on the corrective action side of things, let's look at QMS planning, process execution, all of the processes within our organization using this kind of risk-based glasses type approach, risk-based targets and goals. And the idea is that risk-based thinking will actually replace preventive action. So preventive action, because I think it hasn't been adopted well and it's not very well understood, really gets kind of a strike from the standard, and then this terminology called risk-based thinking replaces it. So some sectors, again, like automotive with the failure mode effects analysis and advanced quality planning, shouldn't have a problem with this new terminology. So risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on an expected result. The draft international standard does not include requirements for preventive action, as I mentioned, and so you see this term risk, which I think is going to be much better at getting companies to be proactive. So there's an entire section called risk 6.1, and the idea is you evaluate risk, plan for risk, what is acceptable and unacceptable risk. what's the probability, what's the severity of, some sort of gremlin popping up in my process, either it be a product nonconformity or a process nonconformity. And the reason the illustration on the right is what it is, the idea is, if you can look at all of your processes within your organization, like different rooms within your house, the thought is, where do I have the most risk? Where are all the areas, or what are all the risks in the different rooms of the house? And then how can I prioritize those higher risks and really look at the stuff that's considered a big darn deal, and making sure that it doesn't, our risk internally do not affect the end customer. And you just continue to kind of think in a risk-based approach. What are the opportunities? What are the things that could come up and really damage our organization or impact the customer or other interested parties? So the thought here is you want to discover problems before they get out of control. If you look at this timeline and the fact that there's an event in time where you detect a nonconformity, the thought is, let's think about process execution and planning. Let's think about objectives. Let's think about the development of our information systems and tools in a way that would allow us to discover problems and take care of those problems before they get out of control. Some risk you can't detect and you just have to deal with. They're inherent to the process or inherent to your industry. But the thought is at least shorten the reaction time and the problem severity. So that's an illustration that I like in order to try to help people understand that you want to try to focus more resources to the left of this timeline, so back in this direction, versus having, let's say 6 Sigma black belts that are on staff and they're only working with major problems and fires that are out in production. So that's a simple illustration to kind of convey that point. So again, you can see risk-based thinking is the preventive action or proactive type of thoughts. And risk-based thinking has been something that's been around here with the corrective action impact as a requirement for automotive companies, applying corrective action towards similar products and processes. What could happen so I can prevent it from happening in the first place is the real question here. So the purpose is to be proactive, protect the customer, improve performance, and then, take a deliberate approach to handling risk and be prepared should that risk present itself. Okay. This has been implicit in 9001 and related standards, but it's been so implicit that, the existing drafts are trying to make it explicit and very clear by the change of the terms from preventive action to risk. It's a part of the process approach. A risk-based organization doesn't just look for problems, but they also look for opportunities for improvement. You can see here in this illustration a risk-based approach. Here is to add maybe this safety mechanism to a gate around a pool versus something that might be ineffective, like placing a sign on the fence that says, no one under 12 permitted or whatever. This little girl probably can't read that sign. So the thought is, focus on the customer, put in those provisions that are necessary to protect the customer. And in this case, it's with that mechanism. Here's another mechanism where instead of putting in a manual that says depress the brake prior to starting your vehicle, this is risk-based thinking that's been baked into the product design here for a Toyota Prius. You can see you've got to put the brake pedal, you've got to depress that, then you hit the button, and now the car starts. That is a risk-based approach to product design. So where do you start if you don't have any real processes in place now for risk-based thinking. So my recommendation is to take an inventory from macro to micro. So at an enterprise level, if you have multiple sites, or a site level, if you're just a single site or manufacturing location or office, and then look at the process level. What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Use that SWOT analysis tool. You can Google SWOT, and there's tons of different tools and templates that you can find out there free that can help you in looking at what are our risks, what are our potential risks, and which one should we really tackle first. Some examples might be business continuity planning. What happens if there's a natural disaster? What happens if our key supplier burns to the ground? That sort of thought process in a proactive manner. Obviously, there's going to be a point of diminishing return. You can't manage or mitigate risk out of every business aspect. So there's a point in time where you kind of stop and say, okay, we've managed this risk enough. Now let's move on to the next risk and continue to make improvements through risk reduction. FMEA is a good example that forces you to do that. Okay, so again, here's some benchmarks. FMEA, cause and effects matrix, fault tree analysis, Google SIPOC or Google Turtle Diagram. These are tools that I would recommend you start out with. Probably Turtle or SIPOC first. They're the easiest, similar to a SWOT analysis tool. And then for more advanced companies that maybe have good cross-functional teams and resources, look at the FMEA tool to analyze risk. Change management is going to be another aspect of the 9001 standard that is new to some organizations. So plan for changes, control changes. What changes need to have approval from, let's say a safety perspective or an environmental perspective. Risk-based thinking is a part of change. So when we change from supplier A to B, what is the potential effect to production? What's the potential effect to our customer? Is it going to be harder to deal with communication with the new supplier? So it's just that sort of thinking in terms of changes to your product or your process. And then control, the amount of control you have is based on the extent of the change or the extent of the risk to the change. So that's what you'll see in 6.3. I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions?
No.
We've got about 3 minutes left, but I started about 6 minutes into the hour, so I'm going to try to get us caught up as close as possible. I know some of you have a hard stop at 1. So I'm going to press through the next few slides, and then we'll open it up quickly for Q&A at the end. So there is another significant change here based on this word knowledge, necessary knowledge. So the idea is that you evaluate what the knowledge is that's needed to achieve conformity, effectively operate defined processes. You have access to knowledge. Your employees, your team members have access to that knowledge, either through documentation, through training plans, through hiring qualified folks just out of the gates. If there's significant knowledge needed, then that may include, hiring a higher caliber, more educated, skilled, experienced, or trained individual. And the necessary knowledge needs to be evaluated against, how what is a suitable number of documents that I need to have in my quality management system? So the way I look at that is where the absence of a document could equal a nonconformity, then you might want to consider having a document in place or something else to supplement that lack of knowledge in that particular process. So we'll get away from this word competency and start to see knowledge and necessary knowledge in the new standard. Annex A, we talked about that, which is would be kind of in the back of the standard, clarification of the new structure, clarification of what the requirements mean. You have a change from the 8 management principles to this new 7 management principles, and some of the things that are significant there is instead of just involvement of people, you actually have engagement of people. Instead of, we kind of lose principle 5 here, it's baked into principle 4. You get rid of this, is it continual versus continuous? Well, let's just call it improvement. Instead of factual approach to decision making, you have evidence-based. And instead of supplier relationships, your 7th principle focuses on managing relationships of any interested parties within your organization. So it's a quick run through of your management principles that would be in Annex B. And then Annex C introduces this portfolio of 10,001, which is QMS documentation, further guidance on implementation of 9,000, 9001, 9004, using a quality management system to drive organizational excellence, and really a value-based QMS rather than just a compliance-based QMS. So that's what you'll see in this 10,001 document. Without getting into too many details, just know that inside TC 176, there are 3 subcommittees called SC 1, 2, and 3 that are responsible for different pieces of these bundles of standards. So the next step, so we're in this review of comments from the DIS approval, which the DIS approval is here in green. Final draft approval is, probably mid-year, July timeframe is when the final ballot is expected to be cast there, and then the approval Q3, Q4 2015. So you'll see, similar to one of the earlier slides, this is kind of the stuff done prior to release. This is the timeline there, about 3 years, and then you'll have about a 3-year timeline post-release to transition over, unless your customer or your registrar states otherwise. So a couple of resources. If you go to our website, we've put a lot of time over the last couple of weeks into modifications here. There's this little section right on the front page that will take you to a 9001 2015 resource page. There's also a link up here. So you'll see articles, key links, webinars, videos. That's where this video will be kept. So feel free to check that out. And it's a good resource. It's free. We have a lot of tools there. We'll continue to add things there. If you have questions or there's something that you need that you don't see on there, reach out to one of us and we'll do what we can to put a link or a resource directly on that page. So this is kind of the core team within the office. I'm Jim. Megan is the office administrator. Ronnie is our marketing and ops manager, and Michael is a business development associate. If there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know. These are the various means of getting in touch with us. We're happy to answer any questions. We also have let me switch over here real quick. We have a promotion that is coming up for August. And let's see here, bring you over here. On our website under training, there is a class coming up here in Charleston, the 18th of August through the 20th. It's going to be a 3-day class, and if you're an automotive client, automotive organization, you can add a 4th day. This is a lead auditor class. It's a 3-day lead auditor class, and that 4th day would be the supplement for TS 16949. But if you're interested and you register by June 19th, you'll get a promotional code to send 3 people, and the 4th is free. So you can get to that. If you're interested in Megan or I following up with you after the webinar, give me your email address in the little chat box, and I'll be happy to reach out, or Megan will call you just after the session today. So with that said, any questions? Any questions at all that came up throughout the presentation?
One thing in particular, you mentioned that the automotive industry is looking to settle on possibly a single set of customer requirements. Is that really likely to happen?
What do you mean in terms of, you mean like the core tools manuals, or
I'm thinking more of, just, how different all the companies, I mean, you in particular have supplied Toyota. I mean, their requirements and Honda's requirements versus Ford, Chrysler, and GM are just so significantly different. I just wondered if there's any movement to consolidate and agree to a common set of requirements.
Yeah, so what I would expect to happen is what happened after QS 9000 was retired and TS came out. There were some customer-specific requirements that could be dropped, let's say in their supplier quality handbooks, because they were already added into the international standard. So my guess is that, yes, there will be some more synergies there based on, I'm just going to call it TS 16949 2016 release, whatever the number ends up being, I don't know. But I suspect you will have some customer-specific requirements that are satisfied inside that standard or that technical specification once it's released. But I don't know that we're ever going to get away from customer-specific requirements. As a matter of fact, the more I audit year after year, the more I pay very specific attention with the clients I'm auditing that they're managing customer requirements very, very closely. Why that tends to be something that companies struggle with is beyond me. Maybe it's because, like you're saying, there's so many requirements to manage. But I hope I've answered your question in that you'll see probably some synergies in the new release that would allow the different OEMs to kind of drop some of their specific requirements because it's in the standard, but then you'll probably see an increase down the road in more requirements that each of these guys kind of impose on their supply chain.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really interested in seeing is what will be the impact. So TS 16949 right now is saying, hey, as a first step in your supplier development base, they need to be moving towards registration in 9001 with the goal to ultimately be registered to TS 16949. I'll be interested to see how that section turns out with the new release. That was a major change, so I want to see if that's going to stick or not. So as soon as I find out kind of the early direction there, I'll definitely be blogging about that supply chain, supplier development piece that's pretty fascinating and what has been a big game changer especially for the mom and pop smaller automotive companies. Good questions. Any other questions or tips or tricks, anything I can share with you before we get off the line?
No, I think it was a very good presentation. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, thanks. Feel free to pass it along. 99% of our business comes from people that say, I know a guy. So we're here to help. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Megan, Ronnie, Michael. Get a hold of us, and we'll help you any way we can.
Yeah, it looks like there's going to be a fabulous opportunity for consultants with all the changes.
Yeah, we're coming out gently, though. I don't want to be jumping to conclusions and offering services on something or advice on something that may ultimately change. But yeah, you're going to see a very significant, probably the most significant change in the 35-year history of the standard. So my assumption is that there will be plenty of opportunities for training companies, consultants, advisors, registrars in that group. So, which is good because we've survived that 2008 through 11 phase. So I'm looking forward to the next few years, that's for sure. Also, if any of you are involved with your ASQ groups within your region, pass this along to them. This might be something that's worthwhile as a lunch and learn, or if they're interested in signing up for a future session. Heck, I've even entertained the idea of doing something like this remotely as a guest speaker, but just dialing into the different sections, dinner meetings or whatever. So just reach out. If I can help, I'm glad to do it.
I think it's interesting that, you went from AS9100 versions to the more process-based ones, and now they're moving to a version that nudges people towards integration. It's going to be interesting to see the different ways the companies implement that,
Yeah, I agree.
Whether it forces them to develop a model so they can see clearly the integration and then go from there, or I don't know. We'll wait and see. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I know that there are, some of our customers that we've been working with for years and I'm really excited that this has happened. I think the economy kind of easing up a little bit has helped. They're sending kind of a cross-pollination of auditors into the lead auditor courses so that you'll have, one auditing team that goes out and looks for these opportunities, looks for these risks, instead of having three. And then you can do things like the integration of document control, corrective action processes, how do you deal with nonconformities. So I'm excited about the direction. I think it'll be easier for management to process because you won't have, your financial system and then your energy system and your health and safety.
It almost, to get the most out of the move to the 2015 standard, it's almost as if you have to pick your implementation plan carefully. You know what I'm saying, Jim?
Yes.
You need to have a baseline because you could almost treat the whole migration towards 2015 as a one big process improvement exercise because you could probably identify savings because of the redundancies and the processes that'll be identified. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's true. Yeah, just think about the number of redundancies that you have in procedures now.
Those will become clear when you integrate, yeah.
Yeah. My recommendation, I was working with a client on Thursday of last week, and, they have to satisfy EMS, OHS, they're 9001 now, but moving towards TS. They have the 50001 energy management system. how do you manage all that? And my recommendation is create kind of like a super standard. Once 9001 gets released and 14 and then 45001 on the health and safety side, and then the energy management piece, create one big standard for your organization and change the font or the color or something like that so that there's one playbook instead of all of these different standards that a manager has to try to juggle. I mean, they're just not going to be able to manage these multiple systems. So that's where I think, one of the changes of allowing the management representative to be more than one person is really going to help. So you can have a team of management system reps, maybe one that has eyes and ears on environmental, one that has on the energy. So I think it's going to be great. I'm excited about it. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to stop recording this session, and you'll be able to find this recording on our ISO 9001 2015 page. Appreciate you joining in. Have a great day, and reach out to me. I'll keep the session open on the screen share on Join Me. If you have any other questions, you can chat there. But thanks for joining. Have a great day.